Okay. Have we any other points on this agenda item and all its appendix? No. So there are no comments. We can move on to item number 9, which is the Treasury Management Strategy for the 2023-24. Okay, is that Adam again?
That's me.
Okay, over to Sue.
We now have obviously the actual Treasury Management Strategy for 23-24. And on page 240 of the agenda pack at the bottom, it says the main changes other than normal updating of dates, odd wording, etc. So on the advice of our advisors, Arlene Close, we want to re-add repurchase agreements as an investment option, and that's further detailed in the strategy. And we want to change the limits that the limits for allowable investments in local authorities and housing associations. And there are 2 required new prudential indicators. One which is linked to ESG policy, where we want to we want to help the committee understand how we are performing against, how the people that we're investing in are performing against their own indicators, and obviously whether we are following our own policy, and also the requirement to introduce a liability and asset benchmark. So in terms of the actual report itself, we've updated the glossary for some of the new items. I'm just looking through the track changes, and I think the main issues are highlighted in paragraph 8.1, where we've updated information about credit risk, given the fact that obviously we are in a different type of environment, with the likelihood of potentially an extended economic recession. And obviously that talks about recession and economic slowdown for some companies, and how that may actually obviously affect the credit risk environment. We then had, on the basis that we are doing the pension fund prepayment, it is appropriate for us to note it in the Treasury Management Strategy, that forms part of the non-Treasury strategy, so that is in section 11. And then the reason why in 12.4, it details why we think it's appropriate to reintroduce repurchase agreements, and in essence that allows the council to lend money to banks on a very short-term basis, but with 100% of the loan being secured by gilts as collateral, which just gives us an alternative option for shorter and medium-term investments. And then just keep on going through. Interestingly, so section 14 is my commentary around risk, and particularly in 14.4 we are actually talking about the fact that there is high risks around levels of inflation, the central bank's response in terms of increasing interest rates, which has meant that we obviously have a very volatile year in terms of our asset values, and it clearly says that all our major asset classes have posted a negative return in year. All indications pointing to the fact that we will have an ongoing recession, and it could be the longest on record, and therefore it's absolutely imperative that the council continues its cautious approach to investing in order to maintain a high level of credit quality within the investment portfolio. And with the capital preservation, as we've already talked about, it's a long-term game, not a short-term game, and clearly on a year-by-year basis it doesn't currently impact the bottom line of revenue, because there's a statutory override that allows us to not have to take that. Now, in terms of one of the questions, in terms of why perhaps we haven't looked to realise some of our poorer performing bonds before, we still need to look at the best time to come out of those bonds, because once we actually divest ourselves, we do have to write that liability in year back to the bottom line of the portfolio. So again, it's looking at the best option, which we are currently doing, we're doing it on a regular basis to work out when the best time to divest of those investments is. And this very much does talk in 17.1 about financial loss and reputational damage. So the strategy does talk about these things. Obviously noting that there is a new indicator linked to our managed investments and the approach to ESG. Section 22.2 talks about what we are currently not intending to have in the strategy. And one of the things I just wanted to point out is that at the current time, whilst equities, in terms of they might be having a bit of a comeback, at the current time we are still not intending as an authority to invest in anything that's unsecured or an equity in terms of the high levels of volatility. But it is something that we'll keep under practice. But for the 23-24 year, it's not something we're necessarily going to be looking at as actively. And no, we're not going to invest in gold and oil. I know we previously talked about exchange traded funds, but because of the accounting requirements, we have to treat them as capital expenditure, and we need to have a dedicated custody account. So again, we're not looking at those items. So the report itself obviously just talks about the changes. And then you have two appendices effectively. The first one is our policy statement, which we're required to have, which is just a very standard policy statement. But the Treasury strategy is actually the second appendix. And again, with the exception of updating specific numbers, interest rates, etc., and adding in the new indicators, along with the items that we now want to invest in. That is the only changes to the strategy, because hopefully members recall that we applied a less risk approach at last year's strategy and are continuing that into 23-24.
Councillor Cubitt.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of the addition of the repos and the reference on page 250, where we're being recommended to take a counterparty risk of 10 million. Who are these counterparties? Will they be pre-agreed by us? And will there be a minimum Moody's or S&P rating?
Yes, so the council has a minimum rating, and so any investments we do, regardless of whether it's repurchase agreements or any of our other agreements, they have to be within the parameters that are set by the strategy itself.
Councillor Tustain.
Yeah, the issue about you talk about oil and obviously the non-green investment stuff. If we're lending to banks, how do we make sure that they're clean? Because not all the banks are.
So whilst we're including those types of investments, obviously our ESG statement governs how we are actually investing and what checks we're doing before we actually invest in those organisations.
Councillor Cubitt.
Sorry, so Sue, just if we could drill down a bit. I mean, in terms of counterparty, what is the rating for the repos, and who are the counterparties on the approval?
So we don't have an approved list. We're saying that we want to look at using repurchase agreements at such time as we look at all the available investment opportunities. We will look at those, but we will look to do that within the actual parameters that we've set in terms of the indicators. So if we look on, I don't know if we've got it listed actually. Let's have a look. So 269, you've got the which one are we including them under, Adam?
So it would be under
Oh, sorry, apologies, it is on there. Bank repurchase agreements, maturity limit of no more than 1 year, counterparty limit £10, and there'll be, we don't have a list of counterparties at the current time, but the in terms of paragraph 6.22 on page 268, it talks about the ratings that we require. So from bank and building societies, a credit rating of A- or higher that are based in the UK, or if it's a foreign country with a sovereign rating of AA+. So we're very clear about what parameters they have to meet in terms of their credit ratings.
Okay, are there any other comments that we wish to make that will go forward? Or can we accept the Treasury Management Strategy?
You're not approving it, you're just noting it.
Yeah, noting, yeah.
A long time ago, when I joined this committee, and this is a comment actually to the administration, Mr. Chairman. The person responsible was a councillor called Councillor James Lewin, and he was extremely impressive, ex-banker, and we managed to avoid losing a lot of money in local authority swaps that were deemed to be ultra-vires, and we also avoided investing in Icelandic banks, which a lot of local authorities lost a lot of money on. And I'm a little bit apprehensive, firstly, about the fact that we don't have our portfolio holder here to talk to us. And secondly, I am very apprehensive about the council considering counterparties outside the UK. I would hate for our council to end up in a Landsbanki Mark II, especially when Arlene Close made reference to credit default swaps widening. And we know that Credit Suisse has had massive problems in recent months. And these were institutions like Credit Suisse was a AAA rated bank, right? So the world is complex at the moment, and I'm just a little apprehensive about how much leeway there is, specifically with counterparties on repos and the individual limits.
So obviously we'll take that comment and add it for the report that's going to council. In terms of portfolio holder, this does not come under the portfolio holder. It's delegated to myself directly from council and is not an executive function.
Councillor Pudley.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, at 12.5 on page 250, where we got Moody's rating agency, that its outlook to negative for UK local authorities, in line with UK government sovereign loans, etc. But from what we heard from Arlington, that there is quite a positive vibe regarding that the ratings may be changed at a fairly short time because of what Rishi and Jeremy has really done. So I am only just concerned that if we're going, is that include us for UK local authorities?
Apologies, I'm not sure I understand the question. So in terms of, obviously, the ratings that we have, obviously we've got long-term investments. There doesn't tend to be the same volatility in those activities. But obviously, if the rating dropped below something that was within our strategy, we would then have to look to divest of that activity and move the funding into something that does. So, you know, this is our minimum. Obviously, we quite often have far in excess in terms of excellence in credit ratings. And obviously that's also linked to some of the benchmarking information you see in the monitoring, not necessarily in here. So local authorities generally have quite an excellence in terms of their credit ratings, but there is actually, all local authorities have their own credit rating, and we apply that when we actually look at whether we would invest with them. Obviously at the current time we don't have any investments with local authorities.
The negative is for all local authority. It's not really focusing on us.
On the government.
On the government, yes.
So they've revised them all, and obviously we have a minimum rating. So if they're below that minimum rating, we wouldn't invest with them.
Yes, Councillor Cubitt.
Yeah, I mean, I've said this every time we have this discussion, but we are all very cognizant of the number of local authorities that are in very serious financial straits. They've borrowed and invested in commercial real estate, and they've been put into special measures. So local authorities do not come without risks, but provided we're very strict with the ratings, and I'm very relaxed. But I just wanted to double, triple check with the Section 151 officer is in the event that hopefully it won't happen, but if a counterparty went down, is what she's saying, because she said it's an exec function, the loss would not be the responsibility of the administration, the loss would be the responsibility of officers.
So if the investment has been undertaken in line with the Treasury strategy, then that is appropriate. If a loss occurs, that is, it's the result of the changing economic environment, not necessarily that the officers made an incorrect decision in the first place.
Okay. Yep. Well, I think we've made our comments on that particular item, so we can move on to item number 10.
Can you just obviously just say that you're noting the policy and
Yeah.
that council will approve the strategy?
Yeah. Okay. As per that, yeah.
So is John next door?
Sorry? I haven't seen him. Right. Spiriting.
Just what I don't understand is, so this paper is the executive responsibility of the administration, but the other papers that we discussed are not. Is that correct?
So under the Constitution, the Treasury management is not an executive function and therefore is delegated directly to me from council. The property investment strategy as part of the strategic asset management plan is an executive function. It's not delegated to the Section 151 officer.
Do we have the portfolio holder? No? In which case, on item 10, we've got Martin on your own.
Martin, shall I introduce that?
Yep. All right.
So obviously, unfortunately, the portfolio holder had intended to be here to introduce this item as it's his paper.
Yeah.
So we haven't had any apologies. So obviously, we'll have to feed back why he's not in attendance. I think what this represents is the strategic asset management plan was approved by council last February, and as part of that, it approved the new property investment strategy and the annual property plan for last year. The current year that was just about to end. This is the annual property plan, so it's not a monitoring report, it's an annual property plan in terms of a statement, in terms of the attention of the activities that will be undertaken in the next financial year. In the main, it just continues the theme of the previous annual property plan and talks about the planned disposals and the list, which is attached as the appendix, in terms of what properties we'll be looking at this year in terms of potential disposals, for which due diligence still needs to be undertaken and will come as individual recommendations, and the lease re-gears that will be undertaken this year. Does any questions?
Yeah, excuse me. We're asked to provide any comments to Cabinet, so do councillors have any comments or observations? Councillor
What about Cabinet? Any comments or observations about the Cabinet? I've got loads.
You can do that afterwards, Councillor. Councillor Cubic.
So if we go back to the accounts and the revenue of the property portfolio, how is it performing, Martin? In terms of, we've had a significant revaluation of our underlying property assets. Are we expecting any further huge increases in underlying valuations? Where are we in terms of the total portfolio?
It's not in here. We were just discussing, Councillor Cubic, that's not as part of this report that we've been asked to consider. That's monitoring of the plan. So can we have comments of what is actually presented to us?
Just a quick question, Martin. Actually, I'm just looking at
Councillor Kotecha?
Oh,
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to ask about regearing. What do you mean by regearing leases? Are you talking about borrowing more money on those leases, or try to?
No. Sorry. No, regearing, it's quite often someone's got a long lease, 150-year lease. That 150-year lease might go down to 60 years, over a period of time. They require that lease to be extended for them to obtain from their banks sort of finance. It gives an opportunity to get a premium for the council, or to look at increasing revenue, improving the rent review patterns, and generally modernising the leases. So that's a programme we've had running now for a number of years, and seems to work quite well.
Thank you.
Councillor Tastain.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry about earlier. The 3.12, the developing community centres strategy. Could you give a bit more information about it? Is this about getting them to let their spaces, or is this about maintenance, or what's that about?
It's about regularising a number of leases. Some are sort of holding over. We are also looking at service level agreements, and there's a sort of paper going to cabinet in the next few months on that. And there'll be a priority list of community buildings we'd be targeting in the first round of that.
So the service level agreements are for them to deliver. It's for the council to deliver service to the community centres, for looking after the community centres, or is it from the other side?
It's from the other side for the sort of outputs in terms of running the community centres. So many groups, various groups and targets, and whether they internally repairing, externally repairing, and just getting things on a level clear footing as to whose responsibility is what, as in the past there's been a blurring of the edges.
Councillor Cubitt.
Yeah, it's I don't know whether I'm being a bit stupid. I'm sure it's because I'm being a bit stupid. But there's very little kind of meat on the bone of this document. There's not very many numbers. I'd love you to talk me through a couple of things. So the MALs and the problems that are happening there. I'd love it if you could talk us through what we're doing to manage the significant capital decline in value of the MALs. And I'd then like you to talk about 3.8, the purchase of Premier Inn, and where the funds came for that. I'd then like you to talk through 3.11, which is the Smarter Ways of Working strategy, because in the accounts it says that our premises haven't gone down in value, and yet we've divested of one whole building and are supposedly renting it out. So I'd love you to talk me through that. And then finally, there was one other thing. Oh yeah, in 2.3 we talk about non-performance of assets, and I think I've asked you before, Martin, about non-performance of assets.
Councillor Cubitt, I'm not prepared to allow those questions. They're questions of monitoring, which will come back when we get the monitoring update quarterly report on the property plan. We're looking at plans and strategies, not digging down into the detail of what's in the specific day-to-day working. Councillor James.
Oh, I don't understand. I mean, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, but I've never attended a meeting before where we have a paper and I'm referring to relevant clauses and paragraphs, and you're telling me that I'm not allowed to talk about any of the content.
Councillor James.
I was going to make pretty much the same point. We call it a plan, but most of the document seems to be dedicated to previous financial year, which makes it appear to be a review. And I think it's very difficult for councillors not to be able to withhold to resist asking questions on a piece of paper about things that are in front of them now. So I appreciate we should be concentrating on the plan element, but it all seems to be interspersed with the strategy. There's a plan, but there's a lot of it is a review of last year. That's what we're looking at. The property plans starts at number 4.
So you want to comment?
So the reason why there is a small section on the previous financial year is to kind of understand how we've been adhering to the previous annual property plan itself. But obviously that all forms part of the ongoing monitoring, and obviously a lot of that came to the last Audit and Accounts Committee where we went through all of those items. If there are some specific questions that members would like to ask, we're happy to take those outside of committee and respond to those.
On the basis of recommendation to Cabinet, I'd like to note then, if we're not allowed to ask questions, that I am not happy that we brought Premier in. That I'd like more information on the sector diversification for specifically the non-performance of assets. That I would like more information on the Civils campus freeing up Parkland and why Smarter Ways Working has been such an outstanding success economically. And finally, I'd like to note that I am greatly saddened about the Mals, and I'd like those specifically mentioned in the minutes of the meeting for tonight. Thank you very much.
So obviously happy to come back on to provide more information on those. What I would say is obviously the SWO project closure report went to scrutiny last week, where all that was explained, and I'm happy to forward that report to you.
No, I know all about what happened last week. I don't want to, but thank you very much. I just like it recorded in these minutes that I've said what I've said. Thank you.
Councillor James.
Can I just ask that they're recorded as comments that Councillor Cubitt made? Because I actually think the Premier Room was a very good investment deal. I think Smarter Ways of Working has been a huge success. Congratulate officers on that.
Okay. Duly noted. Councillor Basham.
I just wanted to thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to draw attention to the annex at the back of the property plan, and just call out Swan Street. Swan Street's a building that I looked at taking an office in a couple of years ago, and then suddenly found I couldn't rent anywhere there, and then I found out a lot more about Swan Street and what goes on there. I'd just like to say that if this current proposal goes ahead to sell it back to the community at a discounted value, I think it's great, and I think it's to be applauded. Thank you. The other question I have about this appendix here is just the site at 3435 Jewel Road car showroom. Is that the Jaguar car showroom?
That's the Jaguar car showroom where we've got a grand rent.
Okay, I didn't realise that was a Basingstoke and Dean property. Okay, thank you.
Okay, on to item 11. Thank you, Martin. Which is the work programme for the 30th of March. Have we?
6th of March. It does say 30th of March on here.
Does it? When is it?
6th of March.
Who's the ultimate arbiter on whether it is the 6th? Is it? So is everyone clear on that? It's the 6th of March. Bearing in mind the previous discussion on EY, is that going to be available? Well, okay.
If the accounts are finished, it will come. If it's not, it will go to the following
Committee, right.
Although we might bring it back and just say completing our delegates it, if it's substantially completed.
Yeah, Councillor Basham.
Chair, if I may, just the point that we were talking about earlier when Ernst & Young were here, about this committee reviewing its outputs. I just wanted to draw people's attention to the back of the SIP for position statement. I appreciate everyone might not have it with them, but it says to discharge its responsibilities effectively, the committee should report annually on how the committee has complied with this position statement, discharged its responsibilities, and include an assessment of its performance. The report should be available to the public. This is the report that I'm referring to that I couldn't find in the history, and I may have missed it. And I think it's the report I can't find in the work programme going forwards. It's the report that doesn't relate to training of this committee. It's the report that doesn't relate to a review of the terms of reference of this committee, which were the two things that were put forward as appeasing this. I really would like to see this worked into the future work programme of this committee.
Yeah.
So there is no requirement under the Constitution. I think the committee has previously decided not to undertake that activity, but if the committee feels they want to do, the report would go to council in terms of that activity. So if the committee wished to pull together a report which could be cleared here before it goes to council, there's no problem with that at all. It would probably come in sort of June, July time.
Thank you, Sue. I do think it should be an independent review. I don't think it should be a review carried out by this committee, because I think this committee has been deficient in not doing that for the last X years. And I really do think that, you know, if we're going to look at our adherence to governance standards, which are not reviewed as part of the audit, which we established earlier, and hence we have a governance hole, then I think that we do need a third-party independent view on this. And I would seek members' views on that in debate.
So,
I'm happy to take that away and see what the options are available to you.
Given that Councillor Basham says he's interested in views, I would completely support him. I know there's extensive works that are happening to the Constitution, and if the reason for it not happening is because of the Constitution, then maybe this is another amendment that needs to be required to the Constitution.
It's not a requirement to the Constitution to have it changed. Obviously, it's up to the committee whether they wish to undertake this work. But obviously, we'll go away as officers and look at what the options are.
yeah, I think it's a very valid point, which we need to pick up and look at offline, see how we proceed with that. Yeah.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. My point about the Constitution is that there are extensive amendments taking place to the Constitution at the moment and are happening regularly. And so if it's not in the Constitution, and the reason for it not happening is because it's not been in the Constitution, and yet it's in the SITFA undertakings, we probably need to have it reviewed by the team that are reviewing the Constitution, as well as our committee having it reviewed.
There's also some very good guidance from SITFA on audit and accounts committees, which maybe we should put into that pot. Yeah.
Absolutely, Chair, that's what I was referring to. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, if that be all, thank you all for coming. I declare the meeting closed.